have a big number of experts working with us. Sorry, colleagues, we had here some minutes ago about ADG education, and it happened that the Minister of Education joined as well. So that displayed some minutes of the day, and I will make you channel, and we thank you for your collaboration and for your participation in this event. First of all, I think we are here in a unique region in the world, extraordinarily highly connected with all that we assume that this is one of the best results of the transformation summit. And it's about how to better manage and bring towards the future of education. So this COP27 is absolutely the epicenter to think about how to fill the gap of having not more than 50% of the curricula will have a specific focus on climate change. We are here as well, and it has been discussed by our ADD, to try to explore the possibility within thousands of pavilions in COPs to have one pavilion dedicated to education. Because education is everywhere, but without having one specific spot, perhaps we are not getting the momentum of this important moment. And of course, we consider the education like an enabler, but of course, an accelerator of the transformation. We at UNESCO, we are custodians of the ACG4, and this is this moment in which we need to think about curricula, about all the technical expertise and all the kind of scientific effort as well, to try to bring schools, to try to bring learning, to try to bring capacity, and of course the readiness, and of course to bring all the communities all over the world. How to do that? It's important to think about TVET education. So vocational and technical education is not something that happens when a university career is not happening. No. But we should, of course, something that happens everywhere. We have a lot of confidence on TVET education as one of the most important forces for social mobility. And that has been key and has been written several times over I don't know how many years. And we need to educate many communities. And one of the communities that we need to educate, of course, is as well families. Families of young people that are much more interested in developing a technical career. There is another important point that has been even included in some of the remarks at the opening of the COP27, not just in the voice of the President of the Republic of Egypt, but as well delivered in the message of the Secretary General. And this is related to the capacity of the climate change to create, to develop new forms and new kinds of employment. And I think that TVET should adapt. And it's a very important transformation tool, and is, of course, an enormous capacity and platform to create a new kind of curricular and professional profiles. In terms of helping the transition, helping the environmental transition, helping, of course, the energetic transition, but helping as well the cultural transition. The cultural transition to change our own patterns. In fact, we discussed it yesterday, and we are organizing here at UNESCO Pavilion more than 10 science events related to equality, environmental education. And of course, we are very committed, but we have all of us focused in this capacity of adult education, not like learning education, to transmit and to be the guarantor of the intergenerational transmission of knowledge. I think this is extraordinarily important. We are very happy here at the Cairo office, Sharm el-Sheikh, to have with us the TVET colleagues of UNESCO, and we have here as well, of course, our institute in Apple. So your presence is not welcome, but we are very, very grateful to have you here. believe us if we told you that we have already organized several meetings yesterday and today with very good prospect to enhance collaboration with you and to enlarge collaboration according to the results already obtained in a very important COP. This is the COP that happened before, and it's the John COP. We are going to provide you with all the recommendations, and you will be one of the most prominent supporters for preparing the COP28. Thank you very much to all of you. And in session to start, we will be very attentive to the recommendations that we will formulate for the end of the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sands, for your inspiring and insightful opening remarks. I'm not sure if you can hear us well. If you can kindly confirm, because it's a bit hard for us to hear from the floor.
We hear you loud and clear, Sana.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So actually, yes, thank you very much for working together with UIL, UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning. We are pleased to here together with UNEVOC and UNESCO Cairo office to discuss this important topic on adult learning and education and lifelong learning for a greening transformation and sustainable future. So in this panel, it will be moderated by Mr. Nicolas Yunus. He's a team leader of the UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning for the inclusive team, together with myself, Samah Shalabi, also member of the inclusive team UIL. So as mentioned, the title of this panel would be Adult Learning and Education with lifelong learning perspective for greening and sustainable future. UIL, or the UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning, within its strategic framework and activities, is supporting the countries and member states to create a culture of lifelong learning through capacity building, policies, advices, in order to address the challenges faced by the human beings and also by the world, such as a climate crisis. The Marrakesh Framework for Action, which has been recently adopted by 142 member states in the 7th International Conference on Adult Learning and Education in Morocco, actually recognize the urgency and the need for the climate action for sustainability. Therefore, the member state committed through this Marrakesh Framework for Action to promote education for sustainable development and to advance awareness on the causes and effects of climate change so that all youth and adults can better understand urgent sustainable development issues and act as empowered citizens. Also, the Marrakesh Framework for Action highlighted the importance of quality adult learning and education within the perspective of lifelong learning. And here, also the member states recognized the importance of adult learning and education for the implementation and also recognizing the SDG 4, but also the rest of the SDGs, including SDG 13 on climate action. So in this panel today, we will together discuss with our distinguished speakers, which I would like to welcome them and of course thank them for accepting our invitation. And this is also maybe a chance to say welcome to all the participants online and also on site. So in this panel, we will discuss key items. Here, the importance of lifelong learning, as said, in order to raise awareness of the youth and adults and equip them with the knowledge and the agency and skills to adapt the climate, and also to be an active member or citizen for the climate change. We would also look at and discuss with our speakers what are the key or the main strategic actions on a national and a local level that can make youth and adults non-formal education and informal learning efficient in addressing climate action. Lastly, we would also stress on the need of the partnership and why the partnership is key and what are the key or the mechanisms that should put in place in order to ensure effective partnership towards or to promote adult learning and education for climate change. Without further ado, I will give the floor to our first speaker, which would be Mr. Niels Annen, and his intervention would be recorded. Mr. Niels Annen is a member of parliament and parliamentary state secretariat to the Federal Minister for Economic Cooperation and Development from Germany. So colleagues, if you would please play the video from Mr. Annen.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. So the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, a lot of development gains worldwide may be undone, for instance, on education and on food security. At the same time, human-made climate change is continuing unabated. Floods, longer drought periods, tornadoes, and rising sea levels are pushing people into poverty or reinforcing poverty. We need to mitigate climate change and adapt to its consequences. Education and lifelong learning play a key role for climate action, and that goes for all people, regardless of age, gender, or origin. It is vital to ensure by 2030 that all learners acquire the knowledge and skills needed to promote sustainable development. The German government's support for education is guided by these international three goals. Through its development cooperation, Germany fosters equality, education, and lifelong learning along the entire education continuum. In BMZ's view, this particularly includes practice-oriented knowledge and practical skills in relation to environmental and climate aspects. For the transition to a green economy, with enterprises needs to qualify workers with the necessary skills for green or sustainable jobs. This means that vocational training, thus, also contributes towards a successful just transition, including for marginalized people. Vocational training addresses the following points. First, general efforts to strengthen or introduce environmental education in training programs. Second, training in new occupations in climate-related sectors. But third, also adjusting existing vocational skills to the needs of a green economy. For example, we work with partner colleges in Senegal that train experts for an efficient energy industry. Ladies and gentlemen, we are increasingly involved in support for vocational training in green sectors, such as sustainable transport, for instance in India, Rwanda, but also in Kenya. In addition to this, we are also supporting universities and scientists to work on solutions to mitigate climate change and to adapt to its consequences. We all know climate change is happening now. Its consequences are becoming more noticeable every day. So we act now. We must need to act now, and we must not leave anyone behind. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Niels Annen, for this important intervention and also the call for inclusive lifelong learning opportunities for all in order to be able to mitigate the climate crisis. Now we're going to move to our second speaker in this panel, Miss Julia von Westerholt. She is a DVV, or the director of the German Adult Education Association, DVV in Bonn. And from her, we will hear what is the key or the main strategic actions from the DVV international experience perspective in order to make youth and adult and non-formal education efficient in addressing the climate change, but also we would hear from her the role of the partnership. So Ms. Westerholt, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. I hope you all can hear me very well now, because please advise if you can't hear me. I at least could not hear very well what the Secretary of State, Niels Annen, just said. So I will not be able to make any references to what he said before. I'm very pleased to be here and to share with you some thoughts from DVV in Germany. Just a brief introduction from my side. I'm the executive director of DVV in the total DVV, so to say, and DVV is on the one hand the Deutsche Volkshochschulverband with the national branches, meaning we have 900 adult education centers across Germany, decentralized. They are part of the communities and so to say independent from each other, but we serve as their umbrella organization for advocacy and advice and internal information. We also have DVV International, as you rightly mentioned before, working in more than 30 countries in adult education and adult learning and education, so to say. So we have a vast experience, not only from our national experience, which we try to sort of transfer internationally, and vice versa. We are learning a lot also from our projects internationally and try to include much of what we learn internationally into our national work. So this is a very, very interesting activity at our headquarters, and I'm glad to be able to share some of our learnings with regard to the topic of today. So what are the main strategic actions? You asked me to give some advice on that. Well, actually, I think that the all the knowledge around sustainability and everything that we learn in this context should be streamlined in all formats of adult learning education. It's not like an add-on value sort of offer. It has to be part of the standard curricula in all regards. In Germany, we have the same situation when we talk about sustainability, education and sustainability. People think, well, this is sort of an extra classroom thing. No, it's not. It's not an extra curriculum. It actually is most effective whenever it is part of all curricula, and this is what we'd like to emphasize. Also important, not only to include it, as I said, in all curricula, vocational training, citizenship and leisure-oriented adult education and learning, but also training of the teaching staff, of course, and supporting guidelines and handbooks. So it's a total, it's an inclusive approach, as I would call it. Secondly, another strategic action from our point of view would have to be, according to our experiences, to follow a whole institutional approach, meaning that live what you teach. So what does it mean? It means that the organization itself needs to follow sustainability requirements, and only if all the learning units, so to say, the organizational units show what it is like and can go forward as with a good example, so to say, the students will find themselves immersed into a world that they can more easily adapt to. So this is the second, as we would say, a strategic action to take. The third one would be that we think adult learning and education services should need to know and reflect and act, should need to show how to know, reflect and act, meaning that ALE should always include action-oriented components. So hands-on, as I would call it, the focus should be on participatory and competence-based approaches. We all probably have seen or heard of or even participated in urban gardening projects. That's just one little example to illustrate what I mean. So it should be action-oriented and not only classroom learning. Then I would also like, if I can, share a fourth strategic action that we'd like to share with you today. That's also the diversity of the target groups and the participants. It's very, very important according to our experience, that we need to keep in mind that that intergenerational learning is actually what we need to strive for. It's not, so to say, helpful to just focus on one group or let's say one part of the educational system. Lifelong learning is much more than just focusing on, let's say, youth or young adults. It's really taking the lifetime learning biography, as we call it in German, into account to ensure that that we can achieve the best results. The second question you asked me was what partnership in ALE and lifelong learning, how vital that is to make us all responsive to the climate crisis, and which mechanisms should be put into place. Well, first of all, I can only say, also from the experience on a national level, not only internationally, it's very, very important to include adult learning and education at the table at all levels when education and sustainable development is discussed. Very often, adult education is seen as a sort of like a marginal sphere of education, which is definitely not the case. As we all know, the adults the societies consist, so to say, mainly of adults. So it's very important not to forget that when we speak about educational strategies or purposes of the future, we need to have adult learning and education at the table from the very beginning. Which is why I'm very happy, by the way, that we have the side event today at the World Climate Conference, because this shows how seriously this issue has been taken. And I'm very, very grateful for that. And this is what we work for in our advocacy processes to ensure that adult learning education is at the table. So what kind of partnerships are important? Of course, action or problem-solving education for sustainable development is only possible in networks within the local community. ALE providers should work in close cooperation with local civic society, activists, but also business structures and local administration, because this enables us to identify entry points for possible interventions and provide participants with direct link to the surrounding environment. So we believe that only in networks can we really achieve a better understanding. By the way, the next year for us, we have yearly themes that we follow in our work. We set ourselves, so to say, thematic goals, and the goal for next year is networking, meaning not only digitally, so from the technical viewpoint, virtual learning, but also networking of all actors in ALE in Germany and internationally. So as you can see, we have identified networks as a very important strategic element in all our work in the times of transformation and worldwide crisis, which we are living through right now. Secondly, another partnership idea that I would like to share is that, of course, and I mentioned it before, adult learning and education is only one part of lifelong learning. So how can we ensure that society can identify and understand a topic of such high importance as the one we are discussing today? It's only by regarding or taking into account that a human being begins his life at a certain point in time and goes through the educational system from the very beginning until the time when he or she leaves working life and starts a life outside, so to say, of his working experience, and has so to say another time left to learn much more. So lifelong learning takes place along the entire learning biography of a human being, and which is why we think that education for sustainable development can only be successful and achieve its goals when it takes place in all sectors of education, from the very beginning to the, let's say, later stages in life, to put it more diplomatically. So yeah, this is it for the time being. I hope this was clear, and I hope very much that everybody could understand me well enough, because we are having some difficulties with the connection. Thank you very much so far.
Thank you very much, Ms. Westerholt, for this insightful intervention and also very clear and structured strategic actions and also the partnership. And allow me to take from what you have already mentioned, that the role also of the local administration. So now we have heard from the national, the international level, but also at UIL, we are working on a local level through our global network for learning cities. And this is because we are believe that the greening transformation must take place at all levels, local, national, and global. And cities in particular, which are estimated to account for 75% of the global green gas emission, have a key role to play in tackling climate change. So therefore, we will move now to the local level and hear from Shanghai City, which is also a member of the GNLC, or the Global Network for Learning Cities. And today, I'm glad to present to you Mr. Jiaxing Li, Director of Shanghai Municipal Institute for Lifelong Learning Education, East China Normal University, People's Republic of China. The floor is yours, Mr. Li.
Yes, hello, and can you help me to share the screen? Can you give me the permission?
Yes. You must have the permission.
Now I cannot share it.
Then
Okay.
I would request the colleagues from the technician team, if you would kindly allow Mr. Li to share his screen.
Yeah, so sorry, and thank you for your help. No, it doesn't matter. Okay.
Just maybe I'll take this opportunity to remind that we have 7 minutes in order to be able to take any question from the floor.
Okay.
Or from the... Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm Jiaxing Li from Shanghai Municipal Institute for Lifelong Education of East China Normal University. Since joining the global network of learning cities in 2019, together with Hamburg and Espoo, Shanghai has become a cluster coordinating city on ESD with the help of UIL. In the context of the climate change, Shanghai adult educators and professors are continuously working on ESD at the community level. China, oh, now it's okay. So I will, oh, yes, okay. So thank you. This is my topic. And since 2019, Shanghai involved into ESD project. As you know, China attaches great importance to its response to climate change. As the largest developing country in the world, China has adopted many policies, measures, and actions to tackle climate change and take part in global climate governance. In Shanghai, the government has issued policies on energy conservation, emission reduction, ecological environmental protection, green buildings, and other aspects to build Shanghai into a city of innovation, humanity, and sustainability. In the process of ESD, we focused on water and energy conservation, carbon emission reduction, green travel, and green lifestyle. We have made new progress, and there are 3 typical projects I'd like to share with our friends. The first one is garbage classification. Since 2019, Shanghai has passed the local legislation to promote garbage classification, and 25 million residents received this education. Among them, adults and the elderly are often in great need of knowledge and capacity support. And young people always can be role models. To support this project, many communities and community learning centers carried out education at different levels through service learning, on-site teaching, and other styles of education. Family learning, working place learning, and digital learning was encouraged. By now, the project has achieved very good results. The second one is education on river regulation. Shanghai is a coastal city, but also a city with 226 backbone rivers in the city, with a total length of nearly 4,000 kilometers. In the ESD project, we have principals and teachers from community learning centers who involved into this project that developed green courses related to river protection, organized experiential activities along the rivers, and carried out voluntary services, thus enabling more citizens, especially the elderly and migrant workers, to form a good ecological awareness and develop the ability of ecological protection. One principal named this lady is named Li Qing, the principal from a learning community center. She in charge of the project in her community, and as a folk river leader, has just selected as the most beautiful woman guardian of rivers and lakes in China. This project is scaling up now in more communities. The third one is the Beautiful Garden Project. In 2022, Shanghai's regulations on the promotion of rural revitalization is officially implemented to promote the rural districts into beautiful, green, and happy countryside. Before that, Shanghai has been building learning villages for several years. In this rural community learning center, adult educators have developed a series of beautiful garden courses for women, for elderly, for the youth. This is a curriculum design, and we have organized workshops to polish it. East China Normal University has established a network, just the lady mentioned, the network to cooperate with adult educators from 5 districts in Shanghai. In tackling climate change, youth, adults, and elderly are crucial because they are the leading force in the society. For example, this is a parent sharing iPhone knowledge with teachers, students, and parents on the bus, with accompanying the children to visit an ecological village. This is a student from my university who is popularizing the knowledge of ecological civilization for the elderly. This picture shows how students, teachers, and parents participate in experiential learning at the Chinese Farmers Harvest Festival. As for the experience from Shanghai, the first point is we should have a very powerful system of community learning institutions. The professional educators and the principals, they can develop the certain curriculum, and the activities of teaching and learning can help people to foster green awareness and develop green skills. You can find that Shanghai has such a system, and Shanghai has over 2 years experience on ESD for adults and elderly, and has got a very good feedback from the people. We are continuing the work, and the new version of the community ESD plan for 2022 to 2023 has been completed and will be released soon. Another point is that intergenerational learning is valuable. We should encourage peer learning among elderly, adults, and youth. The older people's experience of climate change and the green living style can be educational resources for the youth, and the youth can help the elderly to learn the science and the technology related to climate change. So the power of ESD, together with the political power and the academic power, will make adult education and lifelong education powerful enough to face climate change and to make the world sustainable. So thank you very much and welcome to Shanghai. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lee, for your intervention, which is very, of course, comprehensive and provides us with a lot of details on the also community-oriented approach that also giving the agency and the ownership to the citizens in order to empower them for the climate action. Now I would like to also to, thanks to all the speakers, I would like to give the floor now to Mr. Nicola Yunus in order to moderate the Q&A from the floor and also from the chat. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Sama, and I would like to thank you, our honorable speakers, for their brilliant interventions. So we are quite running after the time, so unfortunately we will maybe have time only for 1 or 2 questions for each of our speakers. So maybe I would like to start with Mrs. Westerholt. You mentioned in your intervention, among the different points that you raised, that one of the important things is to develop an inclusive approach for drafting curricula for adult learning and education. And because we are focusing a lot on the importance of partnerships, I would like to know how that kind of curricula are developed or were developed by DVV. Did you manage to include private sector and specifically big companies for developing those curricula?
Thank you very much for this very important question. Actually, we do not work so much with big companies because we are publicly funded. So there is no, let's say, funding need for us to cooperate. But I know that there are cooperations with enterprises in different areas than education for sustainable development. I would just want to point out one issue, maybe with regard to your question, so I can answer it maybe with a different focus, if that's okay for you. Well, I would like to compare maybe education for sustainable development with digitalization and digital competence training, so to say. How would you make learners learn more about digitalization by including digital tools in all areas? In all aspects of learning, so that they are led into needing to use digital tools and needing to learn how to use them. And same applies to education for sustainable development. If you have questions or let's say tasks that involve knowledge in this area in various fields of learning, the learner has to is confronted everywhere and needs to start thinking about how can I learn more about this. So this is actually what I meant. But with regard to the enterprise, the corporations, I'm afraid we don't have that many experiences concisely in that area.
Yes, thank you. Thanks a lot. And maybe without transition, I would like just to ask a question also to Mr. Lee. You during your intervention, you highlighted very convincingly that local level is key for tackling climate challenges and taking actions for climate change. And you pointed out that family and community learning approaches are very valuable for such an approach. Could you elaborate a bit on that? Why do you think that family and community are at the core of the fight against climate change?
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, I mentioned that the community learning and the family learning is valuable. Actually, in China, we have different institutions to encourage these kinds of learning, especially for adult educators. They based on the community learning institutions or centers, and then to organize the activities. By this way, the community learning, even by different groups of people, that can evolve into the learning. And on the other hand, related to the family, the schools, the government are encouraging their parents and the children to work together, especially about the intergenerational learning. Because in China, the elderly people live with the children and the grandchildren. So this kind of intergenerational learning are very valuable. I'd like to share with you one page. This is a policy just published by Ministry of Education in China. This policy encouraged more schools into the green education. So I think it's really important for China and even for the world. So thank you very much for your question. Thank you.
Thanks for your reply. Just before concluding, a short question to both of you. Just we know that usually adult learning and education is quite, I mean, it's quite challenging to find a sustainable way of funding it. And but still we know we are all aware here of the importance of adult learning and education for many of the current challenges that we are facing. So just to have your opinion, to what extent are you optimistic about the capacity of adult learning and education to play this key role in changing the mentalities and in having a positive action on climate change? So Mrs. Bastian, maybe if you want to start.
Yes, this is one of my favorite topics because that's what I'm doing every day. I'm trying to fight for us to be at the table. I mentioned this a couple of times during my intervention. I think the key for us to have an impact in society and to really help learners and of any age to have access to education is really that we, as the lobbying or let's say advocacy institutions in adult learning and education, need to have access to the governmental procedures. We need to be part of the processes that are installed to make this a better world. If we are not part of the discussions, we cannot give our advice and we cannot help to implement what policies are on national, international, or even local levels.
Thanks a lot. Mr. Lee?
Okay, yeah, I just want to share one point. I think we should follow the global challenge or understand the global challenge, especially for Chinese educators. We should understand the whole context in the world, and we should follow the achievements and more achievements or practice. By this way, we can know, we will know we are in the planet. We are in the world to work together. So I think this is important for us. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Before just finishing the session, I would like to remind you that the link to the Marrakesh Framework for Action was posted in the chat box, so you can refer to it if you want to see how the global community thinks that adult learning and education is directly linked to climate action challenges of the world of today. So once again, I would like to thank Mrs. Westerhold and Mr. Lee for your intervention, and I give back the floor to Sama for ending the session.
Thank you very much, Nicola, and all the speakers again, and thanks to all the participants. Without further ado, we now would move to the next panel. So I would give the floor to Mr. Friedrich Hubler for his intervention. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Saman. Could you please first confirm that you can hear me okay?
We hear you perfectly.
Good, thank you. Hello, my name is Friedrich Hubler. I'm the head of UNEVOC, UNESCO's International Center for TVET, based in Bonn. And I would like to welcome you to this second segment of the side event on greening TVET, adult learning, and education. The first segment that just finished focused on adult learning education, and in the second segment we will take a closer look at the role of technical and vocational education and training. I am joined today by 4 distinguished panelists, and I would like to thank them for their participation. They are Bohen Chakroun from UNESCO headquarters in Paris, Marieke van der Weyer from the OECD Center for Skills, Ushio Miura from UNESCO Ramallah, and Dina Mamdou from the Alter Initiative in Egypt. I also want to greet the audience who joined in person at the venue in Egypt and those who joined online. If you're online, I would like to invite you to send comments and questions in the chat. They will be monitored by my colleagues, and if there is time at the end, we will pose some of those questions to the panelists. But first, I want to say a few words about the topic that we will discuss. As you all know, we are living in a time of multiple crises. Countries are still dealing with the consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic. The ongoing war in Europe has exacerbated global supply chain problems and led to rates of inflation not seen in several decades. However, the most serious crisis of all is the global climate crisis that has demonstrated that our current way of life is unsustainable, and that is also the reason why world leaders are meeting at this global climate summit in Egypt. I want to quote UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who said during his speech at the opening of COP27, and I quote, "Our planet is fast approaching tipping points that will make climate chaos irreversible." And he said even more starkly, I quote again, "We are on a highway to climate hell with our foot on the accelerator." On that background, we are here to discuss what technical and vocational education and training, or TVET, can contribute to solutions for the current crisis. And I would like to start with our first panelist, that is Borrén Chakroun. He's the director of the Division for Policies and Lifelong Learning Systems at UNESCO. Borrén, UNESCO has just adopted its new strategy for TVET for the years 2022 to 2029. Could you please tell us how this new strategy can support the development and expansion of inclusive and sustainable economies?
Thank you, Frederick, and good morning, good afternoon to you, also to my colleagues, Mariki, Ushu, and Dina, who are joining this panel. I think the question you just put is very critical, and it in a way frames the UNESCO strategy for technical and vocational education and training that focus on the three main lines of action: how we respond to the demand for skills from individuals within a lifelong learning perspective, how we can support economies to find the right skills for inclusive and sustainable development, and how we can develop the skills that can support the social cohesion, participation in societies of different stakeholders in the society, broadly speaking. So these three main lines of action are in a way framing the strategy, and I would say they frame also the discussion we are having today. First, are we able to respond from the sustainability perspective and greening economy in this case, and climate change, in terms of the demand for skills for individuals, and we equip them for the right skills? How we can respond to economy's demand to engage in a sustainable development and sustainable growth, in producing in a zero carbon economy, in responding to these challenges that we are facing in terms of the demand for a different economy and different production processes, different services, different products as well. And the last is how we can respond to societal demand for new type of skills that requires individuals to access in their community and to participate actively in their community. So that's part of the stakeholders, and the strategy does respond to that. But the strategy also focuses on the content, and we speak in the strategy about transversal skills that are needed for each and every one, but it's also that the skills that are job specific, and some of those jobs are evolving. Some of the jobs we don't know today that will be emerging, and we have to be prepared to provide individuals and to offer a training program that do combine skills for sustainability that are transversal and skills for sustainability that are job specific. And with that, what modalities of assessment and certification, and the strategy is offering this agile and more flexible learning pathways and journey, and with that a more flexible credentialing, like micro-credentials, like developing new modalities for recognizing and validating the skills that are required. But all this is placed within a lifelong learning perspective, is how we can leverage different learning spaces, for example, work-based learning, and I'm sure that Mariki will refer to that, but also online learning in schools and learning in workshops. So that lifelong learning perspective, including for adult, and the session before was referring to that, how we can ensure that the learning for sustainable development is a pathway, and that it starts early, but it continue in a lifelong learning perspective. And we speak about not only youth, but also adults that require those skills. And for that, we need data, and we need capacity to monitor those achievements and the learning outcomes. And that's what the strategy is also suggesting in this context. But maybe to finish my my intervention here, all what we'd like to do in this context will depend on the capacities of the TVET system today, and in terms of their responsiveness. And we do know that TVET system have issues of attractiveness. They have issue of quality, of relevance, of equity and gender equality, and also of funding. And those five, call them challenges that TVET systems are facing, we'll face them when we are acting to advance TVET in a sustainable manner, and advance the challenges of just transition. So we have to keep in mind that we have these major building blocks and challenges that we are acting on, and that any effort will have to take that. And we have two assets there that the strategy is referring to. First, UNESCO-UNEVOC network, which is an asset of international cooperation, knowledge sharing, and solidarity, and the interagency group, which is represented here by Mariki with the OECD, but other organizations that are active in this field, is how we can come together to act collectively and respond, support member states, but also advance the agenda globally. Those are some of the elements, Frederick, I wanted to mention, and I hope that in the discussion we can come back to that. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Brian, for telling us about this vision of UNESCO for TVET. I was wondering if you could just say a few words about how UNESCO plans to engage with member states to ensure that this vision of UNESCO is realized.
Yeah, we'll be doing that in three ways. First of all, we have the policy support and advice that we are doing, and part of the policy reviews and the policy support we do is to look at how economies and societies are responding to those challenges, and what are the direction that economies are taking, and how education systems are responding. So the policy advice and policy support is one thing in the strategy. The second is capacity building, and capacity building of policy makers and leaders, policy shapers, and at the level of the teachers and the teaching profession. And that's something that Frederick, your team is doing. For example, we have the leadership program that does include some of those aspects, but we are also having different projects like capacity building for Education 2030 that is advancing part of this agenda, and working with teachers, better education for Africa Rise, for example, in Africa, and build project that your team is implementing, which is looking at the new qualifications and capacitating stakeholders to design and develop new credentials that can respond to those challenges. The last way we do it is, I mentioned that earlier, but let me give more details, is how we will monitor and what are the metrics that we can use to monitor the progress toward those goals. Of course, it's about the role that the UNESCO Institute for Statistics is having in terms of collecting data on technical and vocational education and training, but it's also the collaboration that we have with the interagency group. For example, the G20 strategy that we have developed with the G20 skills strategy with the OECD and ILO, which is looking at what are the metrics that we can use in this context, but also the work that we are doing through the interagency group on the indicators and data that is part of the contribution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Corinne. Let me now introduce our second speaker. That's Marieke van der Weyer. She is a senior policy analyst for vocational education and training at the OECD Center for Skills. As Corinne just mentioned, the OECD is also part of the interagency group on TVET that is coordinated by UNESCO. UNESCO does not only work with member states, it works with other partners, including UNESCO. And by the way, I just wanted to mention that you will find a link to the new UNESCO strategy for TVET in the chat, where you can find more information. You can download the document. But now back to Marieke. Marieke, as part of this interagency group on TVET, you or the OECD co-developed an important resource on work-based learning for the green transition. Could you tell us how this work-based learning guide complements UNESCO's support for member states that we just heard about from Corinne?
Thank you very much, Friedrich, and thank you to UNESCO for the invitation to speak here today. As you mentioned, we indeed very recently published a document or a leaflet on work-based learning and the green transition. Only 2 weeks ago, in fact, and it was produced by the interagency group, as you mentioned. So this is the OECD, UNESCO, but also CIDIFOP, the European Commission, the European Training Foundation, and the International Labour Organization. And the purpose of the document is to raise awareness, first of all, about the importance of developing the right skills for the green transition, and secondly, about the role that work-based learning can play. So in that sense, it's a very accessible document. It's very short. It's in very plain language, so there's no technical terminology. It's really to be able to inform or to raise awareness with the broad public about this topic. Now, the document gives a short indication of how skill needs are changing due to the green transition, and it also proposes a definition. Now, I know this sounds a bit boring to be talking about definitions, but it is really important in this area. We've seen through in exchanges with various countries, various stakeholders, that everyone has a different interpretation of what skills for the green transition or green skills are. So together with the different organizations who worked on this document, we came up with a joint definition. And we've taken a very broad perspective in this definition. So we look at the skills needed to work and to live in greener economies and societies. And that includes technical skills, so the skills that you would need, for example, in the workplace to work with a greener technology, but also includes transversal skills such as having a sustainable mindset. And in that sense, again, it's very broad. So we're not talking about just skills that you need for green jobs, so not only the skills that a solar panel technician needs, but much broader, we look at the skills that you need in greener jobs, in a greener environment, because you know that all jobs are changing, that societies are changing. So in that sense, that's what we wanted to achieve with this definition as well, to raise awareness about all the changes that are happening. So then why do we focus on work-based learning? Well, we see many advantages of work-based learning. First one is that individuals who are in work-based learning, they have the opportunity to directly learn in the workplace. And that's where you see these green technologies coming up first, of course, where they can experience also these new, more sustainable ways of working practices. There is also the benefit that work-based learning can allow young people, especially, to be agents of change. So they can, because they move between the school, between the employer, they can bring changes about. So they can foster knowledge exchange and they can really make things happen. And importantly as well, work-based learning is not only for young people. We've heard that from Corinne just before, but also in the session just before. Adults, in terms of the green transition, they are in jobs that are changing. They may need to change jobs, and work-based learning is a flexible tool, a relevant tool for them to learn new skills or to develop their skills. Now, a last point I want to raise, it's also an important aspect of the brochure or the leaflet that we produce, is, and that's also what Brian was saying, work-based learning can only work if the right conditions are in place, if it's of quality. So we've identified a set of conditions or enabling factors that need to be met for work-based learning really to achieve its potential to foster the green transition. So first one is that it needs to be built or informed on solid skills intelligence. So we need to know what's happening in the labor market. We need to know how skill needs are changing. and that will inform then the design of work-based learning. We need to have good coordination between the stakeholders, exactly to ensure that work-based learning is aligned with policy priorities for the green transition, but also with the needs of employers and, very importantly, the needs of learners. There needs to be this frequent dialogue that I mentioned before between the schools and between the employers, so that we can have knowledge sharing, collaboration, and maybe even through this knowledge sharing have eco-innovations. Teachers and trainers, they are crucial. They are the heart of work-based learning. They need to have these skills as well. They need to have the skills for the green transition and be able to develop them in their learners. And an important aspect that we shouldn't overlook as well is the commitment of companies. Work-based learning happens in companies, so companies need to be committed to training their current workforce, but also the future workforce, and they need to be committed to sustainability. So this really needs to be in their DNA, to be training companies, to be green companies. Then work-based learning needs to be available for all learners for all backgrounds. So this includes also those who may have weaker basic skills, those who are disengaged from learning, and we need maybe additional support, additional outreach efforts to reach these learners. And the last element here is career guidance. So people need to understand that the green transition brings opportunities. It's not only challenges, there are many opportunities, and they need to understand how they can make the most of these opportunities. So as Boren was saying, and I think that's where the two things are complements, the TVET strategy will support countries in strengthening their TVET system. And that's a crucial first step for TVET and work-based learning to be really able to grasp or to benefit from the opportunities that the green transition brings.
Thank you very much, Marieke, for this overview of the resource that you developed. And I think it's really appreciated that you, as you put it, try to keep it very accessible, because it's important to reach a wide audience with this. We are running a bit behind schedule, so I want to move on to make sure that our other speakers also get the chance to speak. Thank you again, Marieke. We'll now move to Ushio Miura. She is the head of the education unit and also education program specialist at UNESCO Ramallah. Ushio, hello. You have developed a project called TVET for Future that is a response to address climate-related and employment issues in Palestine. Could you please explain in a nutshell how UNESCO and its partners approach the development of green TVET skills among Palestinian youth?
Thank you. Good afternoon from UNESCO Ramallah. And thank you for giving us this opportunity to share what we are doing here in Palestine for Green TVET. We're working with the Belgian Development Agency and able to support youth in developing their green skills through a project we call TVET for Future. As we work on this, we're taking a three-pronged approach addressing training, mobilization, and policy. The first is to provide training for the skills development of youth and TVET educators and trainers. We have developed training materials and modules on green skills, transversal and 21st century skills, digital skills, and entrepreneurship, all contextualized to Palestine. They were developed based on the UN Sustainable Development Goals using the sustainability principles as reference points. Currently, the training modules are being piloted with 200 Palestinian youth and 100 TVET educators, teachers, trainers, and technical staff. Second, we also mobilize youth to advance Green TVET in Palestine. On this front, we have established 3 youth-led TVET innovation hubs, with each hub focusing on 3 different themes: tourism, technology, and fashion design. Through these innovation hubs, youth work together to co-create a space where TVET acts as a driver of innovation and green business solutions. The TVET innovation hubs provide Palestinian youth with tailored skills development packages, innovative market-driven work-based learning programs, and business development services to establish their green business. We also organize awareness-raising campaigns on greening TVET as a future pathway for youth empowerment and resilience in Palestine. We are also working on a policy front, and our vision is to develop a green TVET strategy by the end of 2023. One of the things we're doing at the moment toward that goal is to initiate a platform for public-private partnership for TVET. By bringing together diverse TVET partners for policy dialogue, we hope to build multi-stakeholder engagement and support for green TVET. We would also like to share with you that as a result of our work for TVET for Future, a new partnership with GIZ is emerging. This partnership builds on the rich resources and expertise of UNESCO-UNEVOC in the field of greening TVET. Through this partnership, UNESCO Ramallah and GIZ agreed to pilot a whole school, whole institution approach to greening TVET, with one TVET institution in the West Bank, Nablus Industrial School, which operates under the Ministry of Education. This approach also addresses multiple fronts. First, we will address greening in terms of facilities, infrastructure, and services, such as improving energy use efficiency, improving water use efficiency, waste management, so on and so forth. Second, we will also work on greening the curriculum. On one hand, we will work on mainstreaming green skills and practices and promote green values and ethics in the existing curriculum. On the other hand, we will develop new courses on education for sustainable development, green and clean technology, and green jobs. We will also carry out community outreach to create a sense of ownership in the campus community and involve them in greening. We will conduct awareness raising and information dissemination, resource and facility sharing, and introduction of good practices. Regarding the UNESCO's new strategy for TVET, from our perspective, it can be used by our office, UNESCO Ramallah, as a main reference document for designing our own interventions for TVET. The strategy is also useful as an advocacy tool to encourage our stakeholders, such as ministries, private sector organizations, civil society, business incubators, to adopt and introduce and promote green TVET. The strategy also helps to validate our office's work for TVET, and it can be used as a tool to bring in more partners' support for our work in TVET. Thank you so much again for giving us this opportunity to share our experiences.
Thank you, Ushio, for talking about your experience, and I believe that our colleagues will also share some of the links again to your work and also to the work by Marike in the chat. You already talked about some more concrete activities at the local level in terms of TVET. This is now a very good connection to our next speaker, Dina Mamdou. She's an architect and interior designer, also the founder of the Alter Initiative in Egypt. Dina, welcome to this panel. I understand that you recently started working after you completed your studies, and you are now facing the realities of the multiple transitions that the other speakers talked about. What do you consider as critical skills that are needed by young people and social entrepreneurs like yourself to contribute to climate protection? We can hear you a bit, yes. Maybe you could speak a bit louder. It's okay, thank you.
I just received my master's degree from University of Milan. The reason I pursued my master's was a training I received in 2020 by UNESCO. The training was about leadership and feedback. And it was the first time I ever was introduced to such concept. And I think it's really crucial that everybody working in this field to try to obtain such training. I think this training helped me to have like extra tools that I need to start my own work. As a result of this training, I started this initiative, Alter Initiative. It was tackling the alternative housing and emergency architecture within context and crisis. We were able to raise awareness for around 50 participants in the workshop, and we're also able to come up with solutions for emergency context for how to make shelters that can be easily dismantled and be settled in such a short time. After that, I worked on another project, was also funded by UNESCO. It was an eco-classroom in Cairo. It's a rural area in Egypt. The project was about how to build a classroom using the eco-bricks, which is like plastic bottles filled with compressed soil. So this also an idea that I managed to come up with my team and with the Foundation because of this training, because I got the tools to work on such projects and to understand how to decrease the carbon footprints of projects, how to use sustainable materials, how to engage the local community and to use the local resources that we have. After that, I started studying the masters because I think in addition to TVET, we also need some motivation to be able to work more and develop our skills. So to answer your question, I think that the critical skills are to understand what TVET is, how to apply the green concept to our jobs and our societies as well, to raise awareness so that all of us can have equal access to such information. Also to be, I think to start working on partnerships with other people to help better productions to happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dina. It's really inspiring to hear from people like you who, put their skills into practice to help us live a more sustainable life. I have one follow-up question, if you may just respond briefly. When you look back at your own education and at the education that current students receive, would you say that the education sector and schools are doing enough to prepare students for the green transition that is necessary?
Unfortunately not. The scholastic education and university, they are trying to add more to the syllabus and to introduce us to the concept of sustainability, etc. But I don't think it's enough for youth to start working the world market using these skills. So, and actually, I can say I got lucky. I was introduced to this kind of training from the TVET because it really helped me a lot.
Thank you again, Dina. Well, we have come to the end of this segment. I would like to thank the organizers from UIL, UNEVOC, my colleagues, and colleagues from UNESCO in Cairo. I also want to thank the panelists for their contributions. Thank you very much. We heard from Brian about the new UNESCO strategy for TVET. Marieke van der Weer from the OECD talked about work-based learning. Ushio Miura presented some of the work in Palestine. And finally, Dina just spoke about her experience with sustainable construction. I think it's clear that the climate crisis can only be solved through a fundamental transformation of our economies and societies. And we heard at this event about some of the options for moving towards a more sustainable future with the help of TVET and also adult learning and education. We also learned that the climate crisis can only be solved if all of us work together and if we act now without further delay. To conclude, I would like to give the floor back to Boen Shakroon, who will present some closing remarks. And thank you all again for your participation.
Thanks to you, Friedrich, and to UIL, UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning, UNESCO-UNEVOC International Center for organizing this session online, and also colleagues in Sharm, and I'm sure that they are enjoying the discussion and the engagement in Sharm el-Sheikh. I would like to mention 3 takeaways from our discussion, I think earlier, but also in this session. First of all, how we place the discussion within the lifelong learning perspective. And I will use the term you just mentioned, Friedrich, is we need a radical reforms and transformation of technical and vocational education and training if we are serious that TVET will contribute to the transition that we are all looking at. The second point, that was mentioned, I believe, by Mariki, but also Dina just reflected that, illustrated it, is of course we need the public-private partnership, but we need commitment from companies. Commitment from companies to engage in participating in the skills development, to offer work-based learning, to offer continuing training to their employees, but also to be part of this innovation and reform that we are discussing. And the last is what Ushu was reflecting upon, is we need a mobilization of society, in particular youth, who are the advocate for the transformation and who can be, I would say, the leaders for the transformation. And that wider participation, wider public is very important in this case. So I would like to take these three dimensions that you mentioned. One, radical reform and transformation. Second, a commitment from companies. And third, mobilization of youth and individuals and the wider public to engage in this reform. Thank you to all colleagues who joined us. I have seen we were more than 100 participants in the webinar. There are people who are also in the room, and I wish all colleagues a nice day and good continuation of the Education Day at the COP today. Thank you very much. Bye.